All right, welcome to Management HQ's January Forum. We are so glad you could join us. My name is Michelle Bjerkness. I'm one of the executive directors here with MHQ, and I'm pleased to be moderating our session today. We at MHQ are so proud to serve a diverse and incredible client base doing amazing things for our communities. They include the National Association for Regulatory Administration, National Federation of Paralegal Associations, National Association for Government Communicators, Association for Death Education and Counseling, and the Association for Continuity Professionals. We are always open to working with new clients whose values align with yours and ours. If you serve on another board that could benefit from MHQ's services, please have them reach out. Now, before we get started, please keep in mind we will be recording this event. We ask that you make sure to turn your microphones to mute and turn off your videos. We'll have a 15-minute Q&A segment at the end for your questions. Please submit your questions using the chat feature in Zoom, and you can submit them at any time throughout the session. If you have questions we don't get to, we'll make sure to reach out to you after the event. The focus for today builds on the recent study, Association Trends from Disruption to Opportunity, that was commissioned by Community Brands. To walk us through the key findings and offer additional insights, we're pleased to have Tirrah Switzer, Community Brands Senior Product Marketing Manager and the co-author of the research study, joining us today. In addition to her role with Community Brands, Tirrah is active in the association community and currently serves as VP of the American Society of Association Executives Small Staff Advisory Committee, and she offers a wealth of experience in member-based organizations. Adding additional perspective to our dialogue today is Michael Reed, founding partner of BlochReed Association Advisors, where he provides consulting expertise for association and nonprofit leaders who are looking to affect change within their organization. He's an organizational development expert with more than 25 years of experience and is currently serving on the AMC Institute's Professional Development Committee, the trade association for association management companies. I'm also delighted to have MHQ's very own CEO, Dara Rudick, joining the panel. Her more than 20 years of success and experience serving associations determined to thrive is a spark behind this new forum series. She's worked with dozens of teams and numerous boards to implement their vision and deliver stellar programs. And now we'd like to frame the discussion for today with an overview on the latest trends that emerged from the work of the Community Brands study. Tirrah, we all know 2021 was an incredibly challenging year on so many levels, but it opened up many possibilities as well. I'm looking forward to hearing what your study revealed and steps that will help guide associations going forward. Tirrah?
Great. Well, I am excited to be here with all of you today to discuss these association trends. So as all of you know, keeping up with members' needs has been an ongoing challenge for many professional associations. Audience interest and demographics shift, new communication channels pop up, the evolution of technology brings new expectations for online member experiences. And then came 2020 and the whole world changed. So at Community Brands, we really wanted to know, what do members of associations, trade and professional, as well as association professionals, what they thought about 2020 and how to move forward? So we conducted parallel studies with more than 1,000 members. Most of them were current members, but we also surveyed some lapsed members as well. And then nearly 400 association professionals who work at those organizations. And these surveys were done in September. So really at, at kind of the height of the pandemic. So really timely and relevant information for today. So findings from this study paired with trend data from previous Community Brand studies show that while member engagement is growing and loyalty remains strong, some member priorities have shifted. And this really gives associations multiple opportunities to deliver new and increased value at a time when members need it most. So members were asked to think about one professional organization that was most important to them, and then evaluate its importance now compared to pre-COVID. They were also asked how the pandemic has affected how much they interact with their organization. And half of members believe their organization is more important now than before the pandemic. And very few see it as less so. And almost 40% say that they're interacting with their organization more than they ever did before. and only a quarter say less. And some groups of members in particular find their organization more important and are more engaged with the organization. We're going to talk about them in a few minutes. But there is also some good news. Some additional good news, I should say. 74% of members who employers pay for part or all of their membership dues say that they would still renew even if their employer stopped contributing. And as in previous studies, we asked members to evaluate their organizations, and scores really held steady from 2019 in 4 key brand indicators. So Net Promoter Score, how likely are you to recommend to a colleague or friend? The likelihood to renew, and satisfaction, as well as the connection to the organization. So despite all of the events of 2020, members seem just as loyal today as they did in recent years. Although member loyalty remains high, there's more competition for members' attention than ever before. With an increase in membership options, e-learning, and online recruitment, where do associations fall in line of where members go for these needs? Well, members' responses suggest that they see their professional organization as a trusted source, and a trusted source for professional education and training, networking, and community, that professional community. So these findings point to an opportunity for organizations to make the most of that trust by solidifying relationships with members who traditionally have been more difficult to engage. And the types of ways that members are engaging with their organization are actually really similar to years past. The most popular being attending an event, was probably virtual last year, but attending that event, completing a certification or accreditation program, and continuing education classes really remain at that top of the list of ways that members engage. Continuing education, a little bit of a shift we saw this year though. We saw a lot of late careerists participating in continuing education than we've seen in previous years. And in some open-ended responses, members explain that they are really seeing a return on investment in those career advancement opportunities that come from certifications and trainings. So, why is it important? Members said it improves my self and skills. It improves my position at the company, getting employers to take notice. There's that mix of those personal and those professional advancement benefits. And members really see that return on investment of those continuing education and training. In this year's study, we introduced some more data drill down based on additional demographics. And this was really exciting. This was the first time that we were able to put any data out like this. And we've been doing these studies since 2016. So when we look at demographics, when compared to white members, African American and Hispanic members are younger and they're more engaged. They also believe that their organization is more important now than before the pandemic. And when we look at the top benefits valued, we see that African American and Hispanic members value certain member benefits at significantly higher rates than white members. And just look at industry information. That is a 10 percentage point difference in importance. We also see that training is number 2 and very important to Hispanic members. and both African American members and Hispanic members value code of ethics. And we're going to talk a little more about code of ethics later because it's definitely not a sexy benefit that most associations offer, but it is extremely important to members. And you'll notice that it ranks top 5 for African American and Hispanic members, but it doesn't even rank in the top 5 for white members. So definitely a difference in importance of benefits. Members also say that several benefits have increased in importance this year. So benefits that majority of members say have increased in importance include those that keep the public and members themselves informed about the industry, as well as advocacy, training, and their organization gathering feedback from them. So these are not necessarily the most valued and most important benefits, but these are the ones that we saw see some significant changes of more importance. Members are really focused on those must-haves, including industry information and raising awareness, both considered more important now than previously. We also saw several benefits see quite a move up in importance. So certifications and credentials moved up 5 spots, and fueling innovation jumped up 3 spots. And networking saw the largest gain with an increase of 7 spots. And the interesting thing about networking is in past years' studies, we saw it as a benefit that really brought people in. So it was really important in acquisition, but once someone became a member, it pretty much tanked in importance for early careerists and then started seeing a jump up mid to late career. But now we see it as very important to everyone. And if we think about 2020, I think one of the things that we learned is we need human connections, right? We need that community. And networking is part of that, and really saw an increase in importance this year. And then, of course, I also want to point out that training is number 2. It also took a jump up in importance this year, and training is very important along with those continuing education and certifications and credentials. And as with last year's study, we found that some member priorities differ based on career stage. While industry information and raising awareness are important across career stages, advancement benefits such as training and networking are more important for those early and mid-career. And then those late in their career are more likely to value industry benefits such as advocacy and code of ethics. And again, code of ethics, I always like to bring it up because this was the first year we saw a decrease in the importance of code of ethics overall for members. It's typically number 1 or 2 of most valued benefits. But look at how it changes through the career stage. It's at least top 10 for early careerists, but it's 10. And then we see it go to 8, and then we see it go to number 2. So as people move through their careers, those benefits really change. And I think code of ethics is a really great example to see how that changes. Now, what about lapsed members? Because I said we did survey some lapsed members. And lapsed members within the last 2 years. So their priorities are slightly different than those of current members. So they place significantly higher value on fueling innovation in the industry and socializing. Now, they're lapsed, right? They've disengaged. They kind of see all benefits a little less important than current members do. But we do see industry information remaining at the top valued benefit. And as always, we see that code of ethics in the top 5 as well. Now, the interesting thing that I found from lapsed members was that we see socializing so high on the list of valued benefits. It's really kind of at the bottom for current members, but for lapsed members, it follows right after networking. So those personal interactions with members are highly important to those members who leave. So let's switch gears. Why are members engaging and interacting more? Well, 26% say it's because the organization is more relevant, necessary, given the current circumstances, while 24% say it's due to the organization being more relevant and because the association is offering more online resources. But look at almost half interacting more because the organization is offering more online benefits. The other kind of like interesting tidbit that came out of this is there's really a strong correlation between those who are most loyal and those who cite an increase in online resources as the reason for their increased engagement. So those that are engaging more because there are more resources, they're more satisfied, they're more likely to renew, they're connected to the organization, and they're most likely super members. Your super members are those that are engaged, they're loyal, they love you, they love everything that you do, they want to hear about everything that you do as well. But they're also more likely to belong to multiple organizations. So the fact that they're a super member and engaged with you and you're doing so because you have more online resources, the more likely they are to renew. Members' outlook on virtual engagement indicates that they expect it to stick around. So a slight majority of members, especially those early in their career, say they were already engaging online some or all of the time before the pandemic. Roughly the same percentage say they will continue to engage all or mostly virtual after the pandemic. And the shift towards greater virtual engagement appears to be coming from members who previously engaged more or entirely in person. And they are going to be moving towards a balance of in-person and virtual engagement after the pandemic. And this change is really minor among Gen Y and Z and those early in their career, yet it's really significant among Generation X and Boomers and those mid to late career stages. And members who are interacting with their organization much more now than before the pandemic really found multiple online opportunities very or somewhat helpful for building community and sharing information. So online networking, online continuing education, social networks, those really top the list of, sharing information and building community online. But we also see, earning certificates, online training, virtual events, all top that list as well. So all of these were really important to help build that community during the pandemic. So I just said a lot of information and gave a lot of stats and a lot of information. So let's jump into the panel and we will discuss these as a group.
You're muted, Michelle.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you, Tirrah. Some elements to be expected, but also some really fresh perspectives to consider. With this in mind, we're going to move right into our panel discussion. Participants, if you have any specific questions about the study, we'll make sure to leave time at the end of the session to address those. Just add your questions to the chat box. Now, Tirrah, when I first reviewed the results from your work, I was really struck by the focus again on that value of associations as a trusted source. As you showed, with so many competing resources out there, what do you think associations need to do to maintain that position as a trusted resource for their members?
So I think to continue to be that trusted resource, there's really 3 points that I think are super important. One is continuing to offer value, provide the benefits that members want, and be the leader in industry news and updates. Your association should be the source of truth. Also, fueling innovation for the profession and industry. Use this time to innovate, to re-engage members and propelling your profession or industry forward, and make the changes you've perhaps been putting off, and create that culture of innovation so that you can fuel innovation for your organization. And then lastly, I think this is going to be super important as we move forward, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but really strengthening work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. 2020 marks the first time any American generation is a multicultural majority. Today, it's the under 18 segment. By 2028, it's going to be the under 35 segment. And by 2033, everyone under the age of 50 will be a multicultural majority. So culture plays a critical role in the decisions Gen Zers make, including the brands and the content they follow. And I love this study, a recent study by Cultural Marketing Council. They are an association. They found that more than half of people ages 13 to 49 have quit a culturally illiterate brand, saying it offended them or disrespected their values. So this really tells us that associations must be culturally literate to survive and thrive, and they have to move beyond talk with their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and D&I needs to be baked into every decision.
Really helpful. Did anyone else have anything to join in on that one? All right, we'll move on. So having virtual efforts front and center has clearly boosted engagement overall for many associations. How can associations remember to sustain that as a priority when there's such a strong pull for many to go back to normal as soon as things stabilize? Is a culture shift needed? I'll open it up to the panel here.
I'll take the first stab at that. I would definitely say this is one of those instances where the pivot to virtual environments kind of are going to make a cultural change, but it's not going to be one or the other. I think it's going to be both and. And so you're going to have greater pressures on organizations to offer virtual experiences in addition to that in-person experience. And I think it's going to not only happen with the educational events, but it's also going to happen with the volunteer experience as well. So if you start to think about how volunteers want to engage with their organizations and participate in their organization, it's going to be incumbent on staffs to be much more engaging in a virtual environment to keep those people. Now we used to take people and fly them across the country, and they'd take 2 days off work to go to a board meeting. And I think one of the things this last year has showed is that we can have really effective meetings in a virtual environment. So I would look at it, there's a lot of ways to kind of slice and dice it, and I think the statistics were right on from the study. But the real question is, how do we take those educational experiences or those networking virtual conference experiences, and then how do we move those to the online environment where people are feeling engaged and include then their volunteer experience as well?
Yeah, I would, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was gonna say thoughts from the rest of you guys?
Well, I agree with what you said. I think it's not that we want to go all the way back to where we were pre-pandemic, right? But we do want to, it's sort of this in addition to, it's not, we're not replacing our in-person, because we all miss that in-person. We all want to see each other as humans. But really looking at, aside from that feeling, which is totally legit and should help drive decisions, looking at that data, looking at things like Tirrah's study that are really driving us toward what's working for our association. Are we generating much more revenue right now from these virtual programs than we ever were from in-person? And so with that, how do we incorporate both? And I think that's going to be our challenge moving forward, looking at things. We were asked to look at things completely differently, right, in 2020, just nothing we ever thought possible. Now coming out of the pandemic, hopefully coming out of the pandemic soon, we're going to have to reframe and look at things sort of entirely differently again. And I think that's kind of an exciting opportunity for our associations.
Definitely. I feel like there's definitely no going back, right? We're all fundamentally changed from this last year. But I feel like in the past, we had, virtual was really a secondary thought. In person was always the first way of thinking. So now that's shifted where we think virtual first and in person probably second. And even if you have an event where you have both type of attendees, you're going to be thinking you got to make sure the virtual experience is on point because you will have so many people engaging both ways. So I think that mind shift of virtual first is gonna be a key to moving forward.
Excellent, thank you. The study findings also showed this definite interest in investing more in professional credentials and professional development. So kind of hand in hand with what we're talking about here. How can associations best leverage that interest now? Thoughts from the group?
So at Community Brands, we really talk about kind of 3 trends we see around continuing education that should be top of mind for associations. So first, the world is getting more technical. So therefore, what you study in college yesterday may not prepare you for tomorrow. The price of traditional education continues to go up for students. And alternatives to higher education are growing like weeds. So how does that tie back to associations? In addition to the training itself, members also turn to associations because of their credibility. So digital marketplaces like LinkedIn, they kind of give everyone the opportunity to claim skills, but those claims must be viewed by employers as credible. And then unlike edtech startups who award certificates that most employers have never even heard of, associations really have the opportunity to establish themselves as the source of truth when it comes to credible skills. So the competency can be trusted when it's earned from association, and that's really a competitive advantage for associations. So be aggressive in creating and offering certifications and credentials with your brand that your members can earn and tout as part of their professional story, because this will grow your importance as the education provider to your industry. And this, together with the power and integrity of your brand, puts you a step ahead of higher education and your startup learning competitors.
I would add to that, really, I mean, the data says it all. Our members are finding return on their investment in this certification, credentialing, continuing education. That's a really clear data point. For these associations that already have certification credentialing programs in place, I think that's a great head start, right? How do we breathe new energy into those and re-envision them and make them relevant to this brand new audience that is incredibly and wonderfully engaging in our associations, because of, I don't know exactly why because of, but what the data is showing is over the past year, they've engaged in a new way, right? And then the other piece, for groups that don't necessarily have formal credentialing certification programs, there are some simple steps that these groups can take. If you have some online education already created, packaging that in a way that it could lead to a certification that members can then put on their resume to build their resume. There are just some really simple steps, but having some intentional time and space to envision what does that look like for our members. We understand this is a big value generator. So how do we take advantage of what we already have in place? It's a pretty cool opportunity, and also a way that groups might start to integrate that virtual, fact that people are getting used to the virtual environment with the fact that people are excited to get back together in person. So how do we create those opportunities that combine both?
The only thing that I would add to that is put an underline and an exclamation under the previous comments about the opportunity to innovate. I think there's so many certifications and credentialing programs that have gotten stale and are outdated. And this was a huge opportunity to take a close look at those and say, do we have the right learner pathways into this credential? Are we able to market this at the same way that other offerings, not just other associations, but other offerings out in our space? And I think this move to an online, and if you look at most higher education level type programming, professional level programming, the ability to chunk that into smaller pieces so that people can do it more often, those are the real opportunities to innovate some of these older, more traditional certification programs and do it in a way that can generate new revenue for the organization.
Excellent point. Shifting gears a little here, in our current environment, we've really been forced to do this short-term sprints and metrics, like converting a conference to virtual in a few months. Kind of wondering what your guys' thoughts are as far as, will we ever shift back to a longer-term view, or really should we? Dara, when do you want to start with this one?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, first of all, the internet and social media have completely ruined us for having any kind of attention span, right? I mean, we just don't have attention spans anymore. So the fact that our associations are catching up with that and we're stopping putting these 5-year plans with every stepping stone to get there in place, which they were never realistic. I kind of like that, to tell you the truth. And I also like just looking at, I think it is really important to have a long-term vision. Where do you want your association to be, right? And I think it's absolutely important to have a 1-year plan with some flexibility in that plan. We learned that in 2020. You need to be able to be flexible and agile. But one of the ways that we work with our associations and with Management HQ is we put our 1-year plan in place, and then we work in this 90-day world. It's based on the entrepreneurial operating system, where every 90 days we look at what 3 to 5 things do we need to do to get to our 1-year goal. And the tricky part with that is just staying laser focused and saying no to everything else. How do we stay laser focused on those 3 things? And that seems to work pretty well. Our attention spans are now at the point where we can pay attention to 90 days, what we're going to be doing in 90 days. And I'm mostly speaking for myself, but I see it a lot. And I think so I think the opening our minds to the idea of some shorter term planning while still really holding dear our missions and our visions has been a positive thing, frankly.
I couldn't agree more, and I'll just go one layer deeper in terms of implementing that kind of 90-day cycle or cadence, that 90-day stretch. It becomes really important for everybody within that system to understand what their roles are. So the board needs to stay at a very strategic level, and even if it's a working board, you need to be able to switch your hats really quickly. So you need to take off your board hat and put on your working hat. And then the staff tends to have to drive these strong initiatives because our volunteers are working and our staff are responsible for the implementation of these goals and objectives. And so those lines have always been blurred. And when we look for alignment within organizations, we often see that disconnect exists. If you're going to be successful in these 90-day sprints, kind of this bringing agile to the association world and how we do things, it's really important that everybody understands the system and understands their role within that system. And then things move much more smoothly because you start to see some success and people don't want to go back to the old dysfunctional way. They want to keep in that accomplishment successful mode. And then it just builds on itself.
That's great. Once I got all these opportunities and what this past year has brought to us, there obviously were very there were many gaps as well. And so just wondering what gaps you'd suggest need some attention and focus to make sure we have a healthy future. Michael, maybe we could start with you on this one.
Okay. So I have two that one leads to the other. And I still think we have a leadership gap. And I think we have it both on the staff side and on the volunteer side. And I think that one of the reasons we have those is this idea of succession planning. And we just don't do a strong enough job of setting out expectations for volunteers and then helping them reach those expectations. And the same is for our staff people as well. So the more that we can not throw people kind of into the fire, go from the frying pan into the fire or back and forth, the more that we can bring people in to help them grow into their leadership roles, I think that's really important. And that's one of those internal systems that only gets good with practice. And if you don't have really set succession planning, think of it like a relay race. It's that baton handoff. And if your system isn't set up as to hand off the baton as you all, as organizations, run around track, then that baton handoff becomes difficult. It becomes challenging. You can drop the baton. All sorts of things can happen. So this idea of having leaders and having a succession system, a succession plan in place is, I think, a huge gap, because everything else you can kind of pivot, to use the terrible 2020 word, you can kind of pivot after the fact. But if you get off as a volunteer leader, if you get off on the wrong foot from the very beginning and you're trying to get your bearings underneath you, it's really hard to recover. And the same is true if you're a staff person.
So true. I feel like you can definitely tell the years that succession planning was super important to some organizations I've been a part of, or not on the list at all. But of course, I would love to talk about technology gap. I think, as we all know, the pandemic accelerated the rate of change and digital transformation much faster than any of us anticipated. And through this, we learned that associations have to change, and they are. But just think about the impact that the pandemic had on consumer behavior. It quickly accelerated digital adoption and mobile commerce, right? Like, I literally never have to leave my house for anything. You can even get Girl Scouts cookies through Grubhub now, right? Like you can get anything by your phone. So
what? Girl Scout cookies?
I read this article the other day that Girl Scouts have partnered with Grubhub to deliver cookies. I haven't tested it, but rumor has it. But as we focus on recovery from 2020, it's really going to be critical to sustain this shift to easy purchasing by building member habit and loyalty. So adopting e-commerce activities that make engaging and giving your association money easy, it's really a must for avoiding lapsed members. Convenience is key to a great experience, and it's key to renewals and revenue. And associations that prioritize e-commerce options are really going to rise to the top in 2021 and beyond, especially with Gen Zers.
Yeah, because Amazon has set the bar really, really high. And if they come to associations and don't have that experience, there's just a negative feeling.
I have one organization that I've been a part of for a long time, and every year upon renewal, I'm like, why is it so hard to give you money? Like, I literally just want to give you money.
Well, that really is our challenge, right? Is how do we keep that 51% of members in the survey that said their organization's more important to them now since the pandemic? How do we keep that level of importance? And Tirrah and Michael, I think you have some really great ideas around that. And I still think that in-person component is really, really important, right? I mean, when my work day starts, I've started doing this, and I'm going to say it because I don't think I'm the only one. I shake my dog's paw and I shake my cat's paw. like as greetings. And I don't know that that's healthy human behavior. And I'm really excited to, like, I don't know that we're ever going to be shaking each other's hands, but even just to, you know, see humans. So I also see that in the boards that we work with, right, and in the members where they're it feels like something's kind of off, and we're excited about that piece. So I think that gap, that'll be a good one to fill as well, and really some strategy around how do we keep up. For the groups that saw momentum, how do we keep that momentum up? For the groups that haven't, like, why is that? And one of the pieces that I am seeing that can be a real gap, groups that are able to make fast, informed decisions are really doing well right now. The groups that are really kind of stumbling to decide, or don't have structures, or maybe the board doesn't understand its role, or maybe the staff doesn't, whatever the reason is, if those decisions are made slowly or not data informed or whatever it is, those are the groups that are really struggling right now. So that might be an internal piece that a group can work on just to build itself up, whatever the next chapter is here. So yeah.
Good suggestions. We talked a little bit about this earlier, so we're going to dive into it. We at MHQ do quite a bit of work around diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, with our clients as well as our own team. In light of the horrible racial injustices we've seen this year, there's really an increased need and interest in DEI work among associations, but many really don't know where to start. So Tirrah, wondering if you can help with that data and what are some thoughts there that you saw, and then the rest of us can join in as well.
Great. I think I just want to kind of reiterate some of the information we discussed earlier, right? Is, first also understanding who our members are and who's engaging. And as we learned in 2020, we see more demographics involved. We see African-American and Hispanic members being younger, being more engaged than we've seen in the past. And they're participating more, and understanding who your members are and who's engaging and what's important to them. Because as we saw in the research, advocacy, training, code of ethics was much higher valued importance. So are you meeting those members' needs? But I also think it's obviously going a step beyond that, of giving, not only meeting the needs that they have and meeting the valued benefits they want, but making sure everyone has a voice, and really putting people in positions and having everyone at the table to have that voice.
Tirrah, that was like the best thing in that survey, that we've been, talking with boards for years and years who have been trying to figure out how to get that representation at the board table in their membership of the next generation of members and of our Black, Indigenous, people of color, diverse members that weren't there historically, and for very good reason, because a lot of times they were intentionally excluded, right? Not by us, of course, but there are legitimate reasons for that. And now that we're starting to see folks who are truly representative of our communities want to be part of our associations, like, we need to figure that out. And one of the things that I think is a real tendency for organizations that's super important is to figure out, like, how do we make our organization inclusive, right? Equitable. How do we do that at an organizational level? Super important. But the piece that I see missed all the time is that organization is made up of people like us, right? And if we consider ourselves to be white allies and really wanting to move this equity, inclusion, anti-racism forward, we really need to start with ourselves and doing the work on ourselves. And that can be tough, because I think the first, just that recognition that the society we grew up in, there's a lot of racist stuff that we're taught from day one, right? So I think that it can be such a difficult thing for us to come to terms on, that we need to do work on ourselves. But there are a number of things I think that we at Management HQ do and try to really work on and have open, honest conversations with ourselves. I mean, nobody says 100% perfect things all the time. And I have left organizations because I felt offended that they, you know, there are just so many, there's such problems with what they're saying and how they're saying it. And that exists. That's a real thing. But how do we make the space for someone to have that conversation? Like, you just said something and here's how it sat with me. And I need you to be open and receive that, right? So I think there are a lot of things we can do to start with ourselves. At an organizational level within Management HQ, we talk about our organizational values every week at a full team meeting. Like, how do we live those values? And a lot of that has to do with what do we do to support diversity, equity, inclusion in all of our communities. And our team is committed to that. And they know that, you know, it's kind of a safe space to have those conversations. And I think that really, the clients we select are open to that too, which is really remarkable. And I've just seen over this past year, folks really, really open to learning. And I don't think there's anything more important than that. That's just great. So we're at a cusp where our associations have so much to gain. And it's an exciting time.
So I would tack on to that. From an organizational standpoint, I think the data shows the commitment that individual and organizations like MHQ have to living their values is important. And then there's a next step after that. And how do you put that, how do you break down those systems within an organization that have maintained a power structure or a non-equitable situation from a leadership standpoint? And you can't expect people who may have a voice now, but don't have those same pathways into leadership to be able to do that in your organization. So one of the things we do is look for models that are successful out in the field so that you can apply the best practices to your own organization. And I have to say, one of the strongest programs that a lot of folks look to is the DELT program from ASAE. That program does an excellent job of preparing folks who have a voice but haven't always had a seat at the table for leadership roles. And I think that that is one program that you can do because organizations' challenges are always so different and the cultures are so different that you have to take very bold measures. And I think one of the things that you can do you think about that DELP experience as something you can do to bring up leaders within your organization. But the other piece that's really important is for the organization itself to be very bold in this area. And the example that I'll use is the American Neurological Association is taking a very bold step on access to healthcare and making that part of their strategic plan and doing what they can as neurologists to make a more equitable access to healthcare, especially neurological healthcare. What studies are being done and how are they inclusive enough? And how can they influence the healthcare systems that they participate in to be more inclusive? And so I would say that in addition to Dara's point about doing the work ourselves, the next piece of that is being bold in terms of tearing down those institutional pathways that aren't working to put people into leadership roles. And then how do you use the organization to do bold things when it comes to DE&I? Because the data shows, and this is consistent with broader data on DE&I within the association community, that this can be a winning business strategy. So it's not only because it's the right thing to do, it's because it's the smart business thing to do as well.
I think having some really specific models like that or examples is really helpful to helping people launch that within their own groups.
Be bold.
Be bold. So before we open it up to audience questions, just wondering what each of you would offer as a silver lining to our current environment. Michael, would you want to start?
So, thanks, Michelle. Silver lining. I think that one of the silver linings is that many of us who have, it's really interesting. I've been an independent consultant now for over 10 years. And that means that I have worked from my home office for most of that time and traveled to clients. And when the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden I got a special ed classroom happening just beyond my desk, and my wife, who also has a pretty demanding professional career, working upstairs, everyone would say, hey, you've been working from home for years. Should be pretty easy for you. And I think, yeah, I've been working home for years, but now I've got these two bozos running around the house that I can't get anything done. And so I think the resiliency is the silver lining. For a lot of us, as professionals, we've moved into this, but I want to and for a lot of our members, they have also had that experience, but I want to recognize that that's not everybody's experience. There are still people who have been cut off at the knees with regard to their professions and their struggles, and to how associations kind of build up the resiliency within their members and keep the mental health of their members is really important. So I will say the silver lining is got an asterisk next to it. I think this has proved how resilient we can be as professionals, but that's not everybody in all situations.
I would say I think the silver lining is that associations really kicked butt. They put their members first. They delivered amazing value. They quickly developed new programming, put things out, helped their members navigate what was going on in the world. And members saw it, and members believe in the power of associations. They believe in the value of what you did. They might not have told you that. Most likely they didn't tell you that, but they do, and they value what you did. So give yourself a pat on the back because you rocked it. Now you just have to keep it up.
I think that's I really appreciate Tirrah and Michael, both of your perspectives, because I agree that in a lot of ways, like the best thing, and I've said this probably 14 times already, but that we're seeing this diversity and inclusion in our associations like we have never seen before. And we know people are hurting like they've never hurt before, right? And some of our associations, it depends on so many different factors, but I definitely wouldn't say across the board, every association we work with is feeling like things are awesome. I think it's been a really, really, really hard year. So I do want to recognize that. But along with that, we have built up a lot of resilience, and we know we can get through really, really hard years. And we have this path forward that I think is so exciting. So I'm really looking forward to that over the next year.
Thank you all. What an excellent discussion. Really appreciate all your very actionable takeaways, suggestions, and insights to help everyone kind of increase engagement and loyalty with their members. So we still have a few minutes. We can open it up for questions from the audience for panelists. Feel free to add your questions to the chat box, and I can present them to our panel. Not seeing any specific questions right now.
So, Dara, I know you didn't try to brag on your organization a little earlier when we were talking about DE&I activities. Can you tell us a little more about what you guys have done?
So I think probably the biggest thing that we've done is just communicated this culture of we are leading through a lens of diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? We might not always know exactly what that means, but we're gonna figure it out, and we're gonna learn together, and we're gonna ask each other questions. So that's a big part of it. And then in working with our clients, one of the things that can be the most difficult for every leader, and I've struggled with it myself, but is knowing what to say. When the Capitol insurrection happened, what do we say to our members? And we're in this time where such bizarre things have become political, right? And so we're kind of walking on eggshells. So the just kind of philosophy that Michael said, the be bold philosophy. I mean, what are your values? What do you believe are right and wrong? And what is going to then lend to more people wanting to be part of your association, right? That's kind of the framework that we look at things. And then we also look at things, I think our diverse audiences are Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ plus folks who are at the table, like have been called upon so much. And some of the people I'm talking to are saying, like, we are exhausted. We need our white allies to step up and say something in these situations, right? So I can give you an example of a couple of groups I've worked with. We were in some board meetings, and after the meeting, folks have approached me and said, I was really, really uncomfortable with this conversation. It usually wasn't something I said, just disclaimer, I don't ever say anything that upsets people. I do all the time, but they came to me and said that. And so as a leader, right? I mean, particularly in the beginning when people realized they could talk to me about that, I was just like, well, what do you do, right? Like in some cases, this might be a client. I don't want to make this person mad. So as a leader, I had to figure out how to have conversations with people because that is my responsibility. I mean, I could just say, yeah, sorry about that. You know, we're not going to do anything. But I think our real responsibility is to have those difficult conversations with each other and lay that groundwork. I mean, we try to warn people when they start working with Management HQ too as clients, like, this is who we are. And, you know, we really believe in it. And that's why most of our clients want to work with us. But in the reality can be really hard, right? Where leaders are having to have conversations with each other saying like, hey, I heard, you know, someone was the conversation we had just kind of went down the wrong track. Here's what I saw. I know you didn't intend it. And just, yeah, kind of putting ourselves out there and taking some risk and being committed to making folks, just making our communities better and more inclusive.
Okay. We did have a question about the ASAE's DELP program. So ASAE is the American Society for Association Executives, and it's their Diversity Executive Leadership Program that's in the chat box. Michael, maybe just quickly, do you want to describe it a little bit for those who might not be familiar with that program?
So that program is, so again, you'd have to adapt for your profession or for your industry. But that program takes sets out has a pretty extensive, people apply to get into the program. And so there's a lot of prestige that the system has put around that program. The ASAE, the American Society of Association Executive Program, has put around that. And there's a set of commitments that go with it, kind of value statements that go with it. And then the competencies that are necessary for success in the association profession as executives in the association profession are laid out. And it's a cohort style program. And so there's a lot of things kind of built into the learning itself and how the learning happens that makes it a successful program. So it really is about taking underrepresented populations in the association community and preparing them for executive leadership roles. But it's not just the education piece, it's the entire system that's around them. There's a lot of prestige. It's an apply to get into type program. And the folks that I know that have gone through it have enjoyed it a lot. And we do some executive recruitment and as part of my firm. And it's always interesting to me. I love to see those folks. I love to see people who have gone through that experience come through when we're doing executive searches for C-suite jobs.
Great, thank you.
So my point of that is people do recognize that and recognize it as a sign of good intention on part of applicants.
Excellent. We do have another question on concerning volunteer engagement. Tirrah, maybe this one's for you. If in your study, are you seeing participation from a volunteer side increasing, decreasing? Did any results come up there?
We actually saw that stat pretty kind of steady from 2019, but I think if we do reflection ourselves on, you know, what 2020 brought about. And if you are in an association where you have staff and your, you know, most of your volunteers are working their full-time job, and, you know, like Michael said earlier, they're at home with kids and they're at home with another spouse, and that just adds like a whole level of, you know, stress too. I think we're going to really see the rise of micro volunteering again. I mean, I know it's a big topic that we talked about, you know, in years past, but I think we're going to see it come back to the forefront. Can you ask your volunteers to do less and have more of them? But I think that's what we're going to see kind of moving forward as everybody continues to balance, you know, everything at home.
You haven't heard anything as far as people being concerned about taking on leadership roles, given the current kind of divisive political environment? Did that come through at all?
We haven't seen or heard of any of that from any of our clients, or let me rephrase that, any that I have talked to. And it hasn't been a conversation that I've had in any of my ASAE committees either. But of course, doesn't mean it's not happening. I just haven't heard much about it.
All right, well, I think we've come to the conclusion of our time here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you gained some really valuable insights and actions you can put into place here in 2021. We'll be forwarding a link to the full Community Brands report for your reference, so you'll have that. And then make sure to watch for details for February's MHQ forum, which is going to focus in on leading your association through a lens of diversity, inclusion, and equity. That'll be for board leaders, so could build on the discussion here today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.